Hi, today we're going to be talking about addiction and family relationships. So there's obviously a lot of things that we've got to define. There are so many misconceptions and different ideas. And I want to start by taking a little bit of time and really defining these words. So first of all, what is addiction? There's a lot of different definitions. The National Institute on Drug Abuse 2012 definition said addiction is a chronic, often relapsing brain disease that causes compulsive drug seeking and use, despite harmful consequences to the addicted individual and to those around him or her. So let's break that out for a second. Addiction is chronic. It is a chronic illness. Now, I want you to think about other chronic illnesses as we go through and talk about this, because there's a lot more parallels than a lot of times we would think at first. But I also want to take a minute to recognize that our definition is not always, it's a great definition, it's right, it's important, but it can be different from how those people who are being affected feel. Sometimes it can feel like not this person has a disease and that needs treatment. It can feel like this person lies to me. It can feel like this person is gone from me. It can feel like this person has stolen from me. It can feel like I can't understand why this person is doing this. And so we recognize that those who are around the person who's afflicted with addiction are also impacted themselves, and sometimes in really deep, hurtful personal ways. And so it's important for us to recognize that what we're talking about when we're talking about addiction is a disease of the brain. And that disease, that condition, causes that compulsive drug seeking. We'll talk, we have a whole nother talk that we'll give on understanding what's happening in the brain. But what's important for us right now is to understand that addiction is a disease that does change the brain, and it causes this compulsivity. And the problem is that it's multifaceted, right? So it affects every part of an individual. It affects them physically, it affects them psychologically, it affects them socially, it affects the family, it affects their community. And so when we think of addiction, we have to think of it in broader terms than just the individual, because it's not just the individual that's impacted. So let's talk about where the first impact tends to be and where the greatest impact tends to be, and that's in the family system. So thinking about families. And it's important for us to use the word system whenever we think about families. Because, traditionally and historically, it is easy to think about families as these groups that are made up of more or less just individual, independent agents, and their only relationship really is the fact that they live next to each other or they live in the same home, and one person's behavior is not necessarily related to the behavior of another person. So you could have something like this. You could have someone saying, I have 2 children. My daughter is terrific. My son is always in trouble. Since I raised both of them the same way, there must be something dreadfully wrong with my son. The idea of the black sheep, the idea that we're all just kind of independent little automatons in families. And the reality is that families, by definition, they are a system, and they are an intertwined system, so that everyone plays a role in the system. Everyone, like the pieces of a watch, though they're unique, each piece is unique, they are interrelated. And as such, it's not possible for one part of the system to change without causing a ripple effect in the whole rest of the family. When we talk about family systems, we recognize that they're not simply, a watch is not simply pieces that are completely independent of each other, acting on nothing, acting only on themselves. And so if a piece of a watch breaks, well, that's a broken watch and that's the black sheep. The reality is that though the pieces are unique, they are intertwined. And anything that happens to one impacts the other. So addiction is a disease, and addiction impacts the family as well as the family impacts the process of addiction. So it's important to take a second and talk about a phenomenon in families known as homeostasis. And I've talked about this in other times before, and it's worth repeating. So human beings have a natural desire to feel normal. It's just something that's ingrained in us. And normal doesn't always mean good. It means whatever has become our norm. And so think about if you've ever gone on a boat and you're on a ship for a long time and you have that at first it feels weird, but then eventually, hopefully, you get your sea legs that people talk about. And that becomes your norm and you're used to it. And then you've been on sea for a few days and you go step on land and what happens? Feels weird. You feel strange. It is a natural human tendency to normalize whatever your situation you're in. And we have a tendency to move towards what has been our normal experience. So for example, I've had a situation where there was a husband and a wife and 2 kids. And one of the spouses developed a severe alcoholism. And this progressed and lasted over years. It caused many problems and it caused consternation in the relationship. And the non-drinking spouse was constantly asking the alcoholic spouse, the spouse with alcoholism, to get help, to get treatment. And he eventually did. And it was a wonderful, beautiful thing for the family. And this person came back after treatment. And within a couple of weeks, actually, the non-drinking spouse was offering alcohol to her alcoholic spouse in recovery. Now that sounds crazy. Why would that happen? The reality is that is actually a process of homeostasis, that it is our unconscious desire to be normal. And when the norm over so many years, the sense of normalcy came from all the chaos that had been involved, it actually was discomforting and it was so uncomfortable when that chaos was no longer there. This tendency of families to maintain homeostasis can actually work against positive change unless it is understood and addressed directly and intentionally. And so how do you do that? Well, first of all, it's important for families to understand that it's normal to want to feel normal. It can seem almost insane. The best example that I have of this is I was working in foster care, and I was working with a couple who'd experienced terrible things at the hands of their biological parents, unspeakable things. They were eventually removed from the home, and they were in the foster care system, and their goal was they wanted to be, it was a brother and a sister, and they wanted to be together, and they wanted to be at a place where they wouldn't be moved from house to house. And finally, they got this wonderful placement where they would live the rest of their childhood in one place. And it was so excited. And I was helping this brother and sister travel up to where they were going to be placed. And I was talking to this brother and I said, "Are you excited?" He says, "Mr. John, this is like the second best thing that could ever happen." Well, what's the best thing? And his answer is, well, if we could go back with mom and dad, of course. That had become his norm, and it may seem ridiculous from the outside. It may seem crazy, but it's not. And so first of all, helping families understand that there is a natural inertia that's going to work against them changing. But if they're aware of it, they can ebb that tide and they can move through it. One of the things that we do that's important to help families understand what's going on in their system is to explore the rules that have been established in their family. So family rules are overt and sometimes covert contracts where they govern how family members should act out their individual roles. So they're basically rules that are sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken. So pause for a second and think about your home. Think about your home growing up, your childhood home. What were the spoken rules? I grew up, I was raised by 2 military officers. I assure you there are many spoken rules that I knew about. Closing the door was a big one because we're not paying to air condition all of the outside of Florida. Closing the refrigerator. I can list them, I can think about. Can you think about what the overt, the spoken, the known rules were in your family? And I wonder if there might have been rules, that things that everybody knew, but nobody ever had to say. Things that you do or that you don't do, that you talk about, that you don't talk about. We don't talk about Bruno. That those rules. Take a minute. Think about your house growing up, your home. What were the overt rules? What were the covert rules? And think just for a second. Maybe even pause and have a little fun with it. What are the rules in your house now, in your home, and with your family? No matter who that is. Even if you live alone, what are the rules that are spoken and known? What are the rules that are unknown, unspoken? Because these rules, they really define a lot of things. They define things like how, what, and when to communicate our feelings or our thoughts. Is it okay to say to someone in your house, I'm angry at you? Or is that not all right? Is it okay to say I'm sad? Is it okay to say I'm excited? Is it okay to... How do you communicate your feelings and your thoughts? There's rules about that. Who has permission to speak? And who can they speak to? And what can you talk about? To what extent can someone in this family system be different from others in the family system? We all have short hair. Is it okay for someone to grow their hair long? We all have long hair. Can you grow your hair short? What are the rules about how someone can express sexuality? What does it mean to be male or female? How do family members matter? How do they acquire worth in this family system? All of these things are part of all family system. They're rules, but often they're unspoken, and they can be healthy and helpful. But sometimes, and especially in families where addiction is part of the system, the rules can actually be working against recovery. In fact, traditionally it's been said that there are in families that are where addiction is prominent, the primary rules are don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And those rules, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, they actually revolve around two things that end up hurting us more and more. One is that going back to that homeostasis, it's this homeostatic collusion. I know, great term. What it means is these rules, if these are the rules of your family system, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Those rules seek to keep that homeostasis really, really tight, and it works against any change. And so if change is going to come, addressing those rules has to be part of the work. It also works to cause what we call impaired mourning. It is a natural, healthy, and necessary part of the human experience to mourn, to sometimes feel sad, to feel loss, to feel sorrow. It is necessary as human beings for us to digest hurt and trauma and loss. And when we don't, when we exist in an environment that says you're not allowed to feel, we can become psychologically, emotionally, spiritually constipated because we constantly hold on to our pain. And so challenging those family rules is critical. And it is one of the first important steps in helping families move from a closed system that keeps them sick to an open system. Let me talk about what those look like. Remembering that we're talking in generalities. Every family is as unique as fingerprints. There are no two families that are exactly alike. But in broad generality, we look at family systems as being open systems or closed systems. And open systems are characterized by things like allowing differences. It's okay to be different. You can be who you are. These are encouraging family systems. They're accepting of each other. There is two-way communication. There's open communication. You're allowed to speak the truth to me, and I'm allowed to speak the truth to you. At the same time, there are boundaries that are honored. And so it is each individual is allowed to set their own boundaries, and those things are honored. There's trust in an open family system. When you have closed family systems, they're characterized by secrets, by lack of communication. There is no honoring of boundaries because you're not allowed to be you. You're going to be who I need you to be. There is not listening. There is not a sense of being heard. And there's that don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. What closed family systems do is they keep us. Just think about closed. If I have a Tupperware container and it's got a little nastiness in it and I keep it closed, that's just going to grow. It's gonna the mold will grow, and it's just how we are as family systems. We can get sicker and sicker, and we'll talk about what that word means in a minute. But if I take that same tub and I open it and I put it outside in the sunlight, it may not be perfect, it may still have some work to do, but that sunlight and that it will start to let the clear out the stuff and stop that growth that we don't want. When we think about moving from a closed family system to an open family system, we also have to recognize that different people are playing different roles. Famously, in the 60s, there's this model that came about where family roles were identified, and we would talk about there being the role of the enabler and the role of the hero, the role of the scapegoat, the role of the lost child, the role of the mascot, right? So the scapegoat would be the person who is identified as you're the cause of our family problems. And then over here would be a hero who is maybe the person. So maybe the person who's the scapegoat is the person with addiction and struggling, and they're out on the streets and they're coming back home and they're really struggling. And then you've got an older sibling or a younger sibling maybe who's doing really, really great and is in college and working on 5 degrees and working for the World Health Organization and running marathons, and that's their role. And sometimes there's this enabler, there's someone who helps take care of the scapegoat. And then there's the mascot, that person in the family system that's like the comedian that helps to break the tension. Then there's sometimes is what they call the lost child, and that's that one that just isn't in trouble but also isn't doing anything. It's just kind of nobody pays attention to. The bottom line is that whether or not there's a lot of ways of understanding family roles, I still like this classic model of understanding that different people tend to fall more into one way or another. But no matter how you look at it, in closed family systems, people tend to fall into very static roles. And that role is not just important for them. It is important for everyone in the system. And so I want to go back to that husband and wife and 2 kids, because, and I talked about spouse and spouse, but it was a husband and a wife. They were all really smart people. They were wonderful people, and they really there was something about them that wanted to get better. But the wife's role was the enabler, and maybe a little bit of the hero, but her role was, I talked about my identity is taking care. I have spent all these years, I take care of everything. And I don't know, that's who my identity is. And the husband, his identity, he was in active addiction, and he, the family system said that he was he was the source of problems. But the reality is that when one person changes their role, even when it is a desirable change, it will have an impact on all the other ones in the system. And so in this case, and we see similar things all the time. In this case, when the spouse is getting healthier, what anybody would say that he's getting healthier, he's in recovery, he's moving in a positive direction, what that's doing that nobody ever expected in that family system, it is completely disrupting the identity of the spouse that has been the caregiver for that whole time. It's important for us. It is very easy for people who are on the outside, family and friends, to get real judgmental either way. But the reality is all of us have these tendencies to one degree or another. So in working with families and helping families helping the whole family move towards recovery, it's important for us to both educate families on these tendencies as well as to explore that with them. What are the rules in your family? And nobody, by the way, is going to have them in a notebook. And that's why I encourage you to think about your own. No one's going to say, well, here's the rules for our family. This is a process that takes work. It takes engagement. It takes thought, and it takes time working with a family to help tease out what the rules are. Because if you know what the rules are, then you can change them. And the same thing is true with the roles. What are the roles that the members play? And once we understand what the rules are, just like the rules, we can change them. I want to talk about a couple of things as we start to close here. And one thing I want to talk about is the fact that addiction has been referred to many, or by me. I've heard a lot, and there's even a lot of literature that refers to addiction as a family disease. And what I found over the years is some people that really resonates with, and some people really struggle with that and don't like that terminology. And I think that the terminology is not nearly as important as understanding what the concept is. And so I want you to look at this chart. And this chart is known as the Jellinek curve. And this was developed by a physician decades and decades ago, but he studied alcoholism specifically. And he found that there was a progression. So nobody becomes alcoholic overnight. There's this progression. And he looks at, as you look at one side and you see, first it's just occasional drinking, but then the problems get worse and worse and worse. And then eventually, if a person develops alcoholism, they just stay stuck in this cycle of trying to get better and not being able to. And eventually, if they, for those that find recovery, they come out of it. What's interesting, when you look at the Jellinek curve and you talk to families about the Jellinek curve, they will be able to tell you where their loved one, where they saw, where they can look back and say, oh my goodness, I see my loved one was having that symptom and having that symptom. But then what we do is we talk to the families about what they were experiencing at the time. And so one of the things that happens as people develop alcoholism is they develop tolerance, right? And so they can drink more and more, and it'll affect them less and less. And that's on that Jellinek curve. But what we can help families recognize is they'll say, yeah, I had a time where I lied for my son, and I called his college and said he won't be there because he's sick, but he was really drunk. And I felt so awful about that. But then as you see the progression of the disease and the increase in tolerance with the person with the addiction, you'll hear the family members saying, I got more and more and more tolerant of doing things that were unhealthy for me. And so what we see with the Jellinek curve is that whether you call it family disease or how you understand it, as addiction progresses in an individual, so do unhealthy symptoms progress and increase in the family at almost a parallel. And the reality is that when the best chance of success for the individual to go up on that chart into healthy recovery, the family needs and deserves the opportunity to have that same journey. And so whether you use that term, family disease or family addiction or not, what's important for us to understand is that the journey of the family is paralleled very often with the journey of the person who is struggling with addiction. Last thing I want to close with this is when individuals begin to seek treatment, when individuals come to treatment for addiction, the family's in crisis. I've been working in residential treatment for almost 20 years now, and I pretty much never see anybody come to my office for the first time on their best day. The families are in crisis and they've been struggling. And one of the most dangerous things that if families aren't ready for it, and that we can help arm families and let them know, there is a tendency to think that the crisis is over once a person has engaged treatment. To sit back and exhale. And it's okay for families to exhale for a day. But we remember that addiction is a chronic disease. And it is a disease that chronically affects not only the person with the condition, but also the entire family. And so the message to families must be, take a breath, be grateful your loved one is safe, and this is not where the work ends. It is where it begins. I hope this all makes sense, and I hope that it will help you to be better armed to understand how to help families who are struggling with loved ones who have addiction, to help them recognize that addiction is a disease of the brain, that it is chronic, and that it requires a chronic treatment, that it is not the fault. It is never about the family being at fault, but the family impacts the disease and the disease impacts the family. Therefore, not only the individual with addiction, but also the family deserves treatment. We help them recognize and begin to understand the rules that are spoken and unspoken, and how those rules may be colluding to keep an unhealthy homeostasis. We help them understand their roles as well, because when they understand their rules and their roles, they can change it. Thank you.